Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for October 19th, 2017. On today's show, we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of news, including Venom movie rumors, a female Thor film could be in development, Morgan Spurlock has a Simpsons mockumentary that's coming out, and the truth about the Snowman. And in the mailbag, we'll answer a question about how studios screen movies for press early and the trend of movie sites publishing spoilers earlier than ever before. This is Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast are Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's up?
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello, everyone.
Before we get into this, one of our readers wrote to us, Mansour G. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Mansour G. He wrote in, yesterday we were talking about the Sicario sequel, and I mentioned that I think we all mentioned that we had not seen any films from this Italian director, Stefano Sollima,
yes.
I think it is. He basically wrote in saying that the Italian director is one of the best crime genre makers. His style is distinct and beautiful. Check out Suburra and ACAB, two films I mentioned yesterday. Second season of Romanze Criminale is almost a masterpiece in peak Italian television. His most recent work is this Italian mafia crime series called Gomorra that builds upon the movie of the same name. Enjoying your podcast. You're missing out on one of the best Italian European directors out there. And thank you for writing in, because I do think if there's any weak point in my filmography, it probably is international film. I know Ben has admitted that in the past. Chris gets to see a lot more international fare than all of us, I think. But even then, none of us have seen the work of Stefano, and he's now on my radar. I almost watched Gomorra, the Italian TV series on, I think, Netflix or something. I remember I was looking up a couple months ago. I was looking up on IMDb. I was looking at, like, what are the highest rated television shows that are currently on TV by the IMDb rating, just to see if there's like anything not on my radar, and this was one of them, the television adaptation of Gomorra. And I almost started watching it. Something else came out on Netflix or whatever, and I lost my train of thought, as often happens. And so I think definitely I'm going to check out, at very least, Gomorra, and maybe one of his movies when I get the chance. I do want to expand my horizons of Italian cinema, and I do want to get excited for this Sicario sequel. Let's just jump into the news, guys. In the news, they're making a Venom movie. We know Sony is developing this Venom movie outside of the Spider-Man universe. Spider-Man's not going to be involved. We now have rumors suggesting that it may adapt a famous comic book storyline. Ben, you wrote this up for the site. What do we know?
Omega Underground has reported that the Venom movie might end up being an adaptation of Venom Lethal Protector, which is a 6-issue limited comic series that first turned Venom from a full-fledged villain into more of an anti-hero, and that seems to be in line with the approach that Sony is taking with these characters. The same thing sort of with Silver and Black, the Silver Sable Black Cat movie that they're developing. These characters that are sort of on the edge of the law, but sort of ultimately teeter onto the correct side of it. But, they have some criminal pasts and stuff like that. There seems to be a little bit of evidence to support this theory. First of all, Lethal Protector takes place, the comic series takes place when Eddie Brock / Venom agrees with Spider-Man that the two are going to leave each other alone, and Eddie moves to San Francisco, and this movie is actually supposed to be filming in San Francisco. And ultimately, the father of one of Venom's previous victims ends up sort of gathering a group of mercenaries and tracking him across the country and trying to get revenge. So that's like the loose story. Also, sort of providing some evidence for this theory is that the company is casting a bunch of mercenaries. So that may or may not be the jury, which is the specific group that appears in that Lethal Protector storyline. They are apparently armored up with some armor that was developed based on stolen designs from Tony Stark. So that might be a little MCU connection. And Yeah, so that's basically it. The only other thing that's worth mentioning there is that an official Twitter account has been started for the Venom movie, and in their first tweet, they refer to Venom as being the upcoming film from Sony's Marvel universe. So now it looks like we can call this thing the SMU instead of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it seems like, since that's it's an official Twitter account, that seems like what the company is now referring to this weird Spider-Man adjacent, Marvel adjacent universe.
So what does this tell us about this movie? I thought originally that this was going to be based in space and be kind of like a horror thriller, kind of like The Thing, or like, almost like Life, which was another Sony film that people theorized was going to be a backdoor sequel or a backdoor way of doing this Venom movie. But it seems like it's not that. So what would this be, Ben?
It seems like in that, and I haven't read that comic series, but I've done a little bit of research about it, and it looks like Venom teams up with Spider-Man in the comics, which is probably not going to happen in this movie because we know that Tom Holland's Spider-Man anyway, is not going to be in this film, and I don't think that character is going to show up in any of these movies, at least for the foreseeable future. But in the comics, Venom teams up with Spider-Man and 5 offspring of the Venom symbiote to sort of face off against this mercenary team. So it still could have those sort of horror-ish elements in there with these, the symbiote and those sort of designs and alien, creatures and stuff that sort of emerge from Venom, and, like talking about Carnage and characters like that. They look terrifying. So that could be sort of in line with the tone that you're talking about. So just because it takes place in San Francisco and features these characters doesn't necessarily mean that the tone is not going to be darker than what we're used to from these kinds of films.
It's so interesting, this movie, because the casting is all like spot on, and actors I want to see in a movie together. But everything else I'm hearing about this movie, including the director and this rumored story, does not seem like anything I want to see on the big screen. But moving on, something people do want to see on the big screen is they want to see more female superheroes, and especially from Marvel, who has not given us that. Kevin Feige is doing press for Thor Ragnarok, and he was asked about the possibility of a female Thor movie. There is a female Thor in the comics. Chris, you're at this up for Slash Film. What do we know?
Right, so like you said, Kevin Feige is doing promotion for Thor Ragnarok, and during that promotion, someone asked him if we would ever see the female Thor from the comics in the film. And he didn't exactly commit to the idea, but basically what he said was Marvel is always pulling from the comics for ideas. Basically how they pulled from Planet Hulk for this new Thor Ragnarok for the Hulk subplot. They could always go back and pull from the comics when there was a female Thor who was it turned out to be Jane Foster, who was played by Natalie Portman in the films. I doubt she'd come back for it. I don't know, but that's basically where it stands.
It's interesting because I think Marvel kind of has this plan. They haven't said this publicly, but this plan to do trilogies. Like they did the Captain America trilogy, they did the Thor trilogy, they are planning this Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, and they have done an Iron Man trilogy. And beyond that, they've kind of it seems like the plan is to reboot in much the same way that the comic books reboot these characters, with this female Thor. So I could very much see this thing happening, with, no spoilers from Thor Ragnarok, but we've already seen that trailer from Infinity War with Thor, so he somehow survives it. Like Marvel's going to kill off the main lead of their movie. But I think going into Infinity War, we're going to see a lot of people on the chopping block. We're going to see a lot of devastation and a lot of casualties. And I would look at the people that have the trilogies. Do you know what I mean? Like they've completed their arcs. The Captain Americas, the Iron Man, the Thors. Those are the people that are probably going to get rebooted when this universe course corrects itself after Avengers 4. But that's just my theorizing. Ben, do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, I'm thinking the exact same thing. Those guys are getting more and more expensive by the day, probably, and they've sort of put their time in when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe thus far. And I think Marvel would be crazy to throw away the brand just because the actor is no longer, financially viable for them. So I think that's a good way for them to keep the Thor character around. Just give that mantle to a different character. And we were talking just the other day about a whole female-led sort of quasi-Avengers movie with all the MCU characters. That would be a really cool addition, a female Thor to that group. If this female Thor movie happens to make it to screens before that one ultimately maybe does one day.
My only hesitation about this is, female Thor might look much like Wonder Woman does with these kind of Amazon women. It kind of has the same aesthetics. I kind of wonder if Tessa Thompson's character Valkyrie, who we see in Thor Ragnarok and who is in most of the reviews getting a lot of people love her portrayal of Valkyrie, if she could be the one to take on the hammer. She's the only one, the only female introduced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that I could think it would make sense that they've already introduced that could take over that throne.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Chris, any thoughts on this?
I mean, I would love if Tessa Thompson took it over, just because I'm a big fan of hers, and I'm ready for her to become an even bigger star after Ragnarok comes out. So I would definitely be on board with that.
I hope everybody that sees Ragnarok, if you haven't already, go see Creed. She is so fantastic in that movie. And if you're not watching Westworld, what? Yes. So moving on, Morgan Spurlock has directed an hour-long Simpsons mockumentary in honor of Homer at the Bat. I think this was announced a couple years ago. Ben, what do we know about this?
Yes, so I don't watch The Simpsons myself, but apparently there's a famous episode that aired, I think in 1992. It's been like 25 years.
You have some amazing gaps of things you have not watched that are culturally like relevant and huge.
I know. It's I'm always working on it, man.
You've never seen an episode of The Simpsons?
So I think maybe one episode, and I watched The Simpsons movie because a bunch of my friends went to the theater, and I was like, well, I'm not going to stay home. So I went and saw that when it came out in, 2007 or something, 10 years ago. But yeah, I never watched The Simpsons. I don't know what to tell you. I skipped it.
Is this the case of, like, there's sometimes that something becomes so big and like a thing, and then like by the time I get to it, I'm like, you know what, it's already a thing. Like I'm so late to this. What's the point? Yeah,
that's definitely. I mean, I think the real answer is my parents probably. I think I remember them saying you can't watch this show when I was very young, and the show was sort of in its heyday. I don't remember what about it they were just like, no, you can't watch this. And then so by the time I sort of developed any sort of sense of independence where I would have decided to seek that out on my own, it was like you're saying, it was just too big at that point. It had already been multiple seasons, and it wasn't as easy to catch up on stuff. And I'm not somebody who typically jumps into a show, 5 or 6 seasons in. I like to watch everything from the beginning. So I think that probably contributed to it as well. I don't know. Anyway, we're getting off topic here. There's an episode.
Wait, actually, before you get going, I just want to say, when I was, I think, in middle school, I think this Simpsons started, which proves I'm an old person, and they banned from my middle school the T-shirts had Bart Simpson, and he said, "Don't have a cow, man." That was considered bad. Whenever that was, however many years ago that was, and now, every kid has seen, South Park, which is 100 times more vulgar and worse than "Don't Have a Cow, Man." But okay, go on.
So there's this episode called Homer at the Bat, in which Homer Simpson sort of teams up with a bunch of Major League Baseball players as enacted in The Simpsons. Ken Griffey Jr., Roger Clemens, Wade Boggs, and Homer ends up joining the winning MVP of the the title or whatever, and he ends up getting inducted into the actual Baseball Hall of Fame sort of as a joke because of this episode. And Morgan Spurlock, the filmmaker behind Super Size Me, has directed an hour-long mockumentary specifically about that episode, and it's a satire of Ken Burns' documentaries, specifically a satire of Burns's baseball. And this one, it takes clips of that episode of The Simpsons and intercuts them with baseball historians and sportscasters and, people like Bob Costas and Joe Buck, commentators and stuff like that, as well as talking head interviews with the animated characters within the world of The Simpsons, like Comic Book Guy and stuff like that. So it's just an hour-long thing. It's called Springfield of Dreams, The Legend of Homer Simpson, and it airs on Sunday, October 22nd, which is this coming Sunday, right around the time of the World Series qualifying games are going on for baseball right now. I don't really follow baseball, so excuse me if that's incorrect. But yeah, I think that's what's going on. So this Sunday night, you can tune in and check out this blast from the past sort of fake sports mockumentary from Morgan Spurlock, of all people.
Okay, this is weird. First of all, I like The Simpsons. Not that I watch them anymore. I don't think anybody watches them anymore. But they're going to keep on going on because I guess generations that are not my generation are watching them. But I like The Simpsons. I like Morgan Spurlock, and I appreciate a lot of the stuff he's doing in television. If you've ever seen his CNN show, Inside Man, it's fantastic. They announced that he was doing a documentary on The Simpsons, kind of to celebrate their, I don't know, not sure how many years they're into The Simpsons. That seemed exciting to me. Nothing about this, what you just said, sounds interesting. It sounds horrible. Like, I don't want to see a mockumentary about The Simpsons based in that world in Ken Burns style from Morgan Spurlock.
I mean, I certainly am going to agree with you because I don't know a damn thing about The Simpsons. But yeah, it does sound, taking a step back from my own personal engagement with this series, it does sound especially weird. You would think that Spurlock would not necessarily be, this seems more like a Family Guy gag or something, which obviously was, that show is heavily influenced by The Simpsons. So I guess you could say this almost sounds like an early Simpsons gag that would be, a throwaway joke, not a full hour-long thing. And Chris, what do you think?
Well, I guess I'm the outlier here in that this sounds like the first Simpsons-related thing I've actually want to watch in like 20 years, probably. I was a huge Simpsons fan as a kid, and I'm one of those people who can like annoyingly just quote it at the drop of a hat, all that stuff. But like most people, I stopped watching it around season 92 or whatever they're up till now. So I haven't watched it in a long time, but I remember this episode, the Homer at the Bat episode, and I remember just loving that episode. So this actually sounds kind of intriguing. And I also really like Ken Burns style documentary, so I'm kind of interested. I don't know if it can fill up a full hour. That seems like maybe it's pushing it, but beyond that, I might actually check this out.
Well, we've found the middle of the Venn diagram then. It is Chris. There you go.
I think I just hate mockumentaries in general unless they're like a comedy film like, This Is Spinal Tap or something like in that vein. I remember around the era of them making Star Wars prequels, they released on DVD this movie called R2-D2 Beyond the Dome. And it was like a behind the music episode based on R2. It's kind of like, I think it's very much in what I'm thinking this Morgan Spurlock documentary is, and it's horrible. It might be worse than the Ewok movies. So,
wow,
yeah, that you have to try to get that bad. Moving on. There is a movie called The Snowman coming out in theaters this week. Critics saw it, and it is getting just horribly torn apart by critics. And we have now learned that 15% of the script wasn't even filmed. The director is trying to make a defense. Chris, you wrote this up for the site. What do we know?
Right. So The Snowman has been in development for a while because it's based on a book for I think it's Norwegian crime thriller, and it's been in development for a while. And for a period, Martin Scorsese was even going to direct it, but he eventually moved on. I think he's still listed as an executive producer on this. And Thomas Alfredson took over. He's the guy who directed Let the Right One In and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. So he's a really good director, but everyone is saying this film is just very bad. I mean, the UK saw it last week, so the UK critics had their reviews before the US critics, and they tore it apart as well. And so it seems like the director is basically doing an apology tour right now before the movie even comes out wide and trying to explain why the film didn't turn out that well. And his statement is basically that by the time they went to shoot, they just were rushed. They were very rushed, and they were so rushed that they ended up not using about 15% of the screenplay. So I don't know. I don't know.
How do you put together a film with missing 15% of the screenplay?
I don't know. He doesn't explain how that happened exactly. He just keeps saying because they were rushed, they weren't able to shoot that, I guess. But that seems extreme.
Yeah, I can't think of a time when I've ever heard that as an excuse before. Like, I mean, that seems like something that you would say maybe if you're working on an indie film where you just simply ran out of budget because you've maxed out all your credit cards and whatever, and you sort of have to make do with, $100,000 or something like that. But this is a movie that stars Michael Fassbender. This is like a major film from a big studio. How is that even possible that they just straight up did not film 10 or 15% of the script? This is insane.
The only thing I can imagine is during filming, they were not making their days, and they were strategically cutting things from the script as they were going, knowing that they weren't going. Like, I don't think it was like, oh, we need to still film this 15% of the script. Oh, you guys are out. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't do that. Like, I think while they were not making their days, they probably had a producer or an AD or whatever making these decisions of what to cut. And, they'll make it work in the editing room. Don't worry.
Right.
But you know what? As much as this sounds like this probably is like the worst example of how a filmmaker should answer this kind of question in junket interviews. But that said, it actually makes me want to see the movie.
Yeah, I agree. I was pretty much indifferent to this movie, but all the negative buzz has actually made me want to see it more. Like I feel like I have to see how bad this is now.
Okay, guys, let's go into the mailbag today. One of our readers, Paul M, writes in about a thread that film critic Scott Weinberg started on Twitter. The Thor Ragnarok reviews embargo broke today, so a lot of reviews hit the web. And film critic Scott Weinberg started this kind of rant on Twitter, basically complaining about how films from like companies like Disney are screened. I'll read what he says, actually. He said, critics agree Thor Ragnarok is great. And then he has an asterisk, a few handpicked critics in New York and LA. He says, Disney pulls this every Marvel movie. Certain New York and LA critics see the movie, then the embargo is lifted, and then a week later, the critics around the country see it. So he's basically kind of insinuating that Disney handpicks critics in New York and LA that are going to like these movies to see them before the general critics at large see them, and that's why you never see this negative buzz for the early reviews. I'll start this conversation off by saying that I don't think that's I don't think that's the case. Most times, at least, I think a company like Disney usually holds their film junket around a world premiere, usually held in New York or LA, usually LA, and the days before and after that world premiere, well, they have all the actors and the cast and crew together in one place. They go to a hotel in the area and hold a press junket where critics from LA can come in and, interview the stars. I interviewed Kevin Feige this time around. People in New York get to screen the film, and they'll do phoners with some of the stars and actors and directors. And the reason why they don't screen it to, I think, the country at large is because they want to control when the press goes out. So as much as they have an embargo set for, today, they want a lot of these newspapers and stuff, they want them to run their reviews the week that the film is coming out, because when those reviews come out the week that it's coming out, the awareness is higher and more people go to the theater to see it because they are aware that the movie is coming out, unlike how you are not aware that the Snowman is coming out this week. And I think that's the reason why they do it. That they're not like trying to pull a fast one. And it should be mentioned that while this movie comes out November 3rd in the U.S., internationally it's coming out next week, starting next week. So I think that's why this first embargo broke this week and not like the week of release, because the week of release is now international. So we're now a week before the actual release of the film internationally. Do you guys have any thoughts on this? Is Disney trying to pull a fast one?
I'm interested to hear what Chris thinks about this, since he lives in Philadelphia and Peter and I are both in LA. So, Chris, what do you think?
Right. I mean, I don't think there's like a conspiracy or anything on Disney's part. I do think not just Disney, just studios in general tend to prefer New York and LA. And as someone who doesn't live in either of those places, it does drive me a little nuts. Like I'm based out of Philadelphia, which, Philadelphia is not a small city. It's not like a small town. But as far as movie studios are concerned, Philadelphia might as well not even exist. Like we get screenings very, very late, almost all the time. My Thor screening is next Thursday. So that's a bit late.
So you get to see it at the same time that international audiences that are paying to see it get to see it.
Right, exactly. And that does sort of bug me a little. So I can sort of see where he's coming from with this. I mean, I don't think it's a like a handpicked thing, like they're only going for the good reviews. I just think as far as studios are concerned, New York and LA are pretty much the be all end all. They're the only people who exist, and it doesn't really matter what other critics think. So I do think there is some sort of, I don't want to use the word bias because that sounds like snobby. I don't think it's bias. I just think it's just the way it is.
Yeah, I think, maybe what might be worth pointing out too is that I think they think that people are going to like this movie, which is probably part of the reason that they showed it early too, because that tends to happen with studios, not just Disney, but any studio that's like really confident in the movie that they have, they'll move up the screening or move up the embargo date or something in order to get the word out there, and allow critics to permeate the social media and all that stuff with what the studio assumes is going to be good buzz, because they themselves have reviewed it internally and they like the film and they believe in it and stuff like that. So that could be the case here as well. But I think a lot of it is probably just what Peter was talking about as far as timing with the premiere and then with international dates and stuff too. So I think it's maybe worth considering that they also just really like the movie and think that everyone is going to like it. But yeah, it does, I'm sure being in a city that's not LA or New York, it can get tiresome pretty quickly.
Yeah, it should also be noted that studios often own studio lots here in LA, and they have, access to screening rooms where they can do multiple screenings, and it doesn't cost as much as renting out a full theater in these other metropolitan cities. But I did want to point out, like, Ben, you saw the film this week.
Yes.
So it's not like Disney chose like, this person's going to like it, we'll show it to him and not this person. I think they did all media screenings this week. I know people from podcasts that saw it this week in LA. So
right.
It's not like they, were selective. I think he's being a little bit deceptive here. And
and a lot of times I'm on the outside looking in on things like that too, because there are, super early screenings of a lot of different things where they do actually handpick people based on, these people get invited to the junket, these people, write for the trades, for example, or something, and like maybe they'll show it to a very, very small select group. But that in my experience anyway, that was not the case with Thor Ragnarok, because like you mentioned, I saw it at like an all media screening where pretty much anyone who wanted to get in could just email the studio, and as long as you work for like a reputable outlet, then you're good to go, kind of thing.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to talk about is a lot of people are complaining because today, while the embargo broke for reviews, there was some outlets that were publishing spoilers. And this is kind of a trend of publishing spoilers early. IndieWire published an article today about what the Thor Ragnarok after credit scenes mean. This is 2 weeks before the movie hits theaters in the U.S. on November 3rd. But of course, 1 week before it hits internationally. So the question is, who is this article for? Because if only press have seen this movie, who is reading this article about what the after credit scenes mean? Like, who has the questions other than, a select group of press?
So allow me to play devil's advocate for a second, Peter. I feel like it would be for you if you didn't run Slash Film, right? Like, based on the way that you've talked about spoilers in the past couple weeks on the podcast, it seems like you would not be opposed to knowing that kind of information beforehand. And I think there are a lot of people out there who just don't really care about being surprised and all that stuff. They just want as much information as possible, and then they're going to judge the movie based on how it executes that, which is sort of in line with what you've been talking about. So I guess it's for them. It does seem a little weird because maybe you would think that you could time it to an article like that to the first day that it becomes viewable by the public at large, whether that's internationally or domestic or whatever. So right now it's basically just for people who have already seen it, these critics, or people who don't care at all about, preserving the theatrical experience.
Which, by the way, these critics need this article because in my screening, I can tell you, like, half the critics in my screening left before the after credit scenes happened, and the other half were like, were a mix of, people like me that run or work for geek websites that know what's going on. The other half were like just bewildered at what's going on. But I think it's also partly Google. One thing you don't know probably from the outside looking into these movie websites is that when someone reports something first, they're most oftentimes more linked, and they're more oftentimes they place higher on the Google search engine when that time comes and people are like searching like Thor Ragnarok, end credit scenes. I'm sure, this website will place up higher. So they are, I think my opinion is they're writing this article for an algorithm and not for people. And they're hoping that when this movie hits theaters on November 3rd, that they will now, because they wrote this so long ago, they were the first to, stick their boot in the sand, that they will place highly and they'll get that coveted Google traffic, which is, if you don't know, it's like gold. That's my theory. But it's just unfortunate because I feel like a lot of people in the process get spoiled. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm with you. I really think it is just for Google. I also think it's just for clicks in general because, here we are, we're talking about that they posted it. So a little controversy, quote unquote. As far as controversy goes, this is not like a big controversial thing. But as far as that goes, it's going to get people talking. It's going to be people on Twitter saying, oh, I can't believe IndieWire spoiled this. And they're going to retweet the article. And that's going to end up getting traffic too. I think it really just all comes down to traffic, which, that sounds like cavalier and cutthroat, but that's how sites survive. So that's how they're going to make their money, I guess. So that's how they want to do it.
It's just interesting that this conversation is becoming earlier and earlier of these spoilers. We oftentimes do these in-credit articles and we Easter egg articles, and we try to do it around the day of release so that people seeing the movie that night can find our article. I don't know. I just don't know. I guess other than my cynical outlook that people are searching, I guess Ben could be right. Maybe there could be a lot of Marvel fans that just need to know and haven't found this information on Reddit already and, just want to find out 2 weeks before they see the movie. But my feeling is there's probably less people like that than in like percentage wise than the people at large. I don't know.
I think that's probably true, but think about the type of people that would seek that out. It's tough bringing in the whole demographics of like everyone who's going to watch the movie, because I would say more than half of them have never been on a movie site before. It's just like general audiences in the blandest, the broadest sense of the term. So I think they're just catering to what they know is out there. I know the writer of that article. I don't think it was necessarily anything, purposefully devious to post it this early. I think it's probably just boils down to what Chris said, where it's like, it's tough out there right now for online publishers, and you got to do what you can to stay in the red, in the black, basically.
Yeah. I do want to say that this has been going on for a while with clickbaity websites that you expect this from. I think the reason why a lot of people got up in arms on Twitter today because of this is it's from a good website and a good writer, and it's just unexpected on that and that website and that writer. And I think people don't go to that site for those kind of spoilers. So
yeah,
it's interesting. Like how should studios combat spoilers? Like how, especially in this international marketplace where the movie comes out a week and a half early or 2 weeks early, internationally, how can a site like Slash Film stay relevant and get that coveted Google traffic from talking about the end credit scene and providing an outlet for people to discuss it and stuff like that, while not publishing that article until the day it gets released in the US? Do you guys have any thoughts?
Chris, anything?
I mean, I feel like we're getting back into like the spoiler conversation again, but I don't know. I feel like no matter how careful you are, no matter like what pains you go to avoid outward spoilers, there's always going to be one thing that someone somewhere is going to consider a spoiler. So I feel like no matter how you're like damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Like no matter how hard you try, there's always going to be that one thing that one person is like, oh, what the hell? This is a spoiler. And you're just going to throw your hands up and say, I give up. I don't know what you want.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that's the answer. Maybe the answer is just go ahead and everyone publish these, what happens after the credits of Thor Ragnarok things, like as soon as the embargo lifts, and then bump them to the top of the page on the day that the movie opens wide, and just mark it, clearly, and say, for the people who, hey, we know you guys aren't going to be able to see this until for 2 weeks or whatever, but just in case, or for international audiences, or if you come to it late or whatever, here it is, and we're putting it out there, kind of thing. Because it seems like, if IndieWire is doing it now, then that seems like a big step in the direction of, well, now the wall is coming down and everyone's just going to do it.
I will end this conversation with a story of my own from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I was at the junket for that. And spoilers for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 if you haven't seen it coming up. But in one of the end credit sequences, they show Adam Warlock's cocoon. And in my interview with James Gunn, which I was planning on publishing, after the movie came out, I part of it, I do a spoiler discussion. I asked him about that scene, and he admitted to me that the Adam Warlock was actually originally in this movie in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and he was originally one of the main characters in it, but they decided to instead put it to this after credits scene, and he said that he'll be in the next Guardians. So with this information, I go back to the hospitality suite at this press room. I'm talking to the entire Slash Film staff in our Slack channel. I'm like, how do we deal with this? Because this is an after credits scene. But I've just been given a major scoop by the director of the film who, didn't hide it from me. Didn't try to he was like, listen, this is what happened. This is going to be an interview that you're going to publish probably before the film comes out to publicize the film. So we decided to publish it without any mention of the after credits scene to basically give his story of how Adam Warlock was originally one of the Guardians of the Galaxy in this movie, and that he will appear in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 without mention that he appears in an after credits scene. And that's how we tried to handle it. And even then we got a lot of people were upset after the fact. After they saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and saw that after credits scene, they were upset that we mentioned anything about Adam Warlock.
Well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. We try to we spend so much time trying to protect spoilers and trying to figure out how to deal with spoilers. And I just want you guys, the listeners and the readers, to know that we do put a lot of effort, and we are trying to be considerate, and we're trying to, keep everything below the jump and with warnings, and, trying not to spoil your experience. But even us get accused of ruining things. So it's weird too, because we never said Adam Warlock appears anywhere in this movie or in that movie, and still I don't think anybody that read it thought they're not saying it, but he's in this movie.
Right.
But then when they see that scene, they're like, oh, it would have been so much better if they never told us that he was going to be in the next one.
Which at that point, it's like, he's going to be in the next one because he just got teased in an after credits scene.
Yeah. So it's almost like spoiler confirmation bias almost. But yeah, okay, we've reached the end of this podcast. Chris, where can we find more of your work online?
I'm at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at CEvangelista413.
Ben, where can we find you?
I'm also at slashfilm. You can find me on Twitter at Ben Pears.
I'm on slashfilm. All the stories published today or on this podcast are published on slashfilm.com. If you have a question to send to the mailbag, send them to Peter at slashfilm.com. You can also find me at slashfilm on Twitter. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. We also do a post every day on Slashfilm. If you want to discuss the podcast, you can do so in the comments there. Please go to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review. That helps us out quite a bit. Go to social media, Facebook, Twitter. Tell your friends about us. That helps us out so much. And thanks, everybody, for listening. We appreciate it. And don't spoil Thor for your friends, please.